Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Accident Compensation Financial Responsibility and Transparency Amendment Bill has been brought before the House because the government realised that it needed to demonstrate that it was using. If you're hard of hearing, just be quiet and listen up.
Order.
If the members opposite are hard of hearing, sir, I wouldn't pass judgment on your hearing.
I'm having no trouble at the moment, so just keep going.
This bill was brought before the House because this government has repeatedly demonstrated that it cannot be trusted to be transparent in the way that it sets ACC levies. And members opposite were challenging my colleague Sue Moroney about the question of whether or not the previous Minister for ACC, Judith Collins, was actually transparent and upfront about the way levies were set when she was the Minister. And just in August last year, barely a year ago, isn't it a surprise that it was just over a year ago, the ACC Minister Judith Collins admitted the reason the government has ignored, this is out of an editorial in the New Zealand Herald, ACC Minister Judith Collins has admitted the reason the government has ignored ACC's recommendation for bigger cuts for the third year running was, quote, because we need to get to surplus. We believe the surplus is something that is very important for not only the government, but also for every business that has to borrow money. So that's where this bill came from, was the fact that successive ministers in this national administration have set levies in order to prop up the surplus or to attempt to reach surplus, not to. Jonathan Young is challenging me on this, and yet again I refer him to his own minister's quote, because we need to get to surplus. We believe the surplus is something that is very important. That was the ACC minister's quote about why the levies were set at the level that they were. The members opposite cannot rewrite history. They cannot give an alternative view as to why this legislation was brought before the House. That is the reason why, is because the editorials started rolling in and the public started to react against this notion that ACC levies should be used for propping up a surplus. Now, the fact is, this legislation is timely and we do support it, and the only thing we lament is that it doesn't quite actually go far enough. Last night we debated sorry, come again? Care to repeat that? No, he doesn't care to repeat that. Funny that. Last night we debated Sue Moroney's SOP, which was around ensuring the definition of public good and when the Minister was setting policy in the public interest, that it related to ACC, that it related to raising funds to provide for the treatment and compensation that people receive under ACC. And prevention as well. Because this public good argument is what has been used previously to justify setting levies at a higher rate than what is necessary for full funding of the Accident Compensation Corporation accounts. And combined with what is already in the legislation, that would have made this a very robust bill. We felt that the changes that were made at Select Committee that gave a little bit more latitude to how the levies are set were necessary, but created the need for this backstop that Sue Moroney proposed. And if the government was genuine about wanting to create more transparency around the way ACC's levies are set, they would have supported that amendment. But they didn't. And that is because they want to leave the door open to being able to set levies that are higher than what is necessary to fully fund ACC. Now, this bill does a couple of things which are necessary now, because we're coming to the end of the period of transition from pay-as-you-go to full funding. And no matter how much rhetoric we hear from the other side, the simple fact is, in 1999, a decision was made to shift from pay-as-you-go to full funding. It was always envisaged that that would take about 20 years. And it was always envisaged that that would take about 20 years. And we're getting close to that 20-year mark. So yes, we need to get rid of the residual levies because many of the accounts are now fully funded. And yes, we got to full funding a little bit earlier than 2019 because of the fact that ACC has been taking far more money than it needed to over the last few years. So yes, the accounts are now fully funded. And many ACC's investments have rebounded from the global financial crisis. ACC's investments are actually it's one of the best performing investment portfolios in New Zealand. In fact, if not the best investment portfolio in New Zealand, which only goes to demonstrate that the public sector can actually run a very good investment portfolio. I know the National Party doesn't like that idea, but the public sector can run a solid investment portfolio, which is why, sir, this bill is perfectly legitimate. We agree with this bill because what it does is it goes some of the way, but not all of the way, towards greater transparency around how ACC levies are set. But it does still leave the door open to the ACC levies being manipulated and misused by a government that still has not been able to get the books back into surplus. The other thing it does is it gets rid of the residual levy, and again, that would have had to happen in 2019 if full funding had been achieved over the term that it was originally envisaged. So there's nothing magic here. There's nothing extraordinary about the way the National Party has run the ACC. If anything, one of the other reasons why it's reached full funding, a couple of years earlier than was ever envisaged, was because it's so much harder to get compensation now under the national government. It's so much harder to get treatment now under the national government. They've slashed funding on programs to prevent injuries, so that's saved a bit of money as well.
Thank you. Alistair Scott.
Speaker, please explain, they say, please explain how the levies are